In 1986, a 20-year-old named Christopher Knight abandoned his truck in rural Maine, walked into the middle of the woods, and pretty much disappeared. Lived in complete social isolation for the next 27 years. Until he was caught, he was a legend that locals simply called the North Pond Hermit, and no one ever knew if he was real or where he lived. He never lit a fire, so nobody knew that he was there, and he survived primarily from hundreds of small burglaries of things that he needed from nearby houses and a camp. He would mostly steal things like food and books, propane, and a few other items that would be helpful to him. After he was finally caught, he was interviewed by all kinds of people. Everybody wanted to talk to him about his experience, but he didn't seem to have any particular motive in mind for why he went out into the woods, beyond the fact that he simply enjoyed being alone. Knight's experience highlights a question that humans have been exploring for as long as there have been more than one human in the world, as we see in the first chapters of Genesis. The question of relationships, and how, as annoying and painful as they can sometimes be, we seem designed for a relational life. Even the introverts were designed for a relational life. In this unit of the Everyday Life course, we're exploring what it looks like to follow Jesus into the relational life you're made for, including the 3 relational tensions that everyone has to hold together, and some advice for managing the 3 primary relational circles that God has placed you in. Let's start here. Jesus had a relational life, and so do you. Just like you, he was embedded in relationships from the day that he was born. And when you pay attention to the relational life of Jesus, especially in the first few chapters of the Gospel of Mark, you will notice how he holds together 3 relational tensions that all of us find ourselves in throughout our lives. As we go through each of these, think about which way these relational tensions tend to pull you. First, the tension between being together and being alone. Most of us tend to lean one way or the other, but if we're following Jesus, we need to make room for both. Jesus was regularly surrounded by people, his core followers and friends, but also crowds of people that he encountered in day-to-day life, thousands at times. He also spent significant time alone, famously 40 days in the wilderness, but it was also his daily habit. It says in Mark chapter 1, verse 35, giving us a window into this habit, it says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he got up, went out, and made his way to a deserted place, and there he was praying. After time with people, Jesus would often spend time alone, and after time alone, he'd often spend time with people. And he encouraged this same rhythm in his followers. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who wrote a book called Life Together, has a chapter called The Day Together, but then he has another chapter called The Day Alone. He recognizes this tension. Listen to what he says. He says, let him who cannot be alone beware of community, but the reverse is also true. Let him who is not in community beware of being alone. And so that's why even as we spend most of the time in this unit talking about relationships, you still have to make time in your life for solitude. When your devices are off and you're alone with nobody but God. It's one of these surprising habits that makes the relational life that you're made for actually possible. But unfortunately, in the modern world, we aren't very good at being either together or alone. Instead, as tech writer Sherry Turkle says, we settle for being alone together, tethered to our devices, never fully alone, never fully together. The next tension that we have to hold together is the tension between our family of origin and the family of God. Jesus grew up in a first century world that elevated your biological family above all the other relationships in your life. But contrary to popular belief, instead of fully affirming those relational priorities, Jesus actually transformed them. Jesus wasn't married, he didn't have kids, but he did have a family of origin that we know of. He had a mom, an adoptive dad, he had siblings, sisters, and brothers, he had aunts and uncles, cousins, and that's all just that we have documented, and probably more family relationships that aren't mentioned. Not only that, he was the firstborn with all of the responsibilities in the family that came with that. But instead of just saying to all of his followers, family first, guys, that's what's most important, just like our culture says, listen to just one sample of his teaching on family. It says this, his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside, they sent a word to him and called him. A crowd was sitting around him and told him, look, your mother and your brothers and your sisters are outside asking for you. He replied to them, who are my mother and my brothers? Looking at those sitting in a circle around him, he said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother. Mark chapter 3, verses 31 through 35. In this moment is just one sample of how Jesus completely redefines the relationship with your family as a follower of Jesus, prioritizing your new spiritual family of those who follow Jesus. But you can't stop there. As you read the New Testament, there are still instructions about how to navigate your primary family relationships, especially if you're married and have kids or you have aging parents. Whatever Jesus means here, he doesn't mean that your family of origin doesn't matter at all, but now they're held in tension with your new family of God. A tension that you're going to feel differently depending on how your family of origin feels about Jesus. Even Jesus in John chapter 19 asked one of his disciples, as he was dying, to care for his mom. The third tension we have to keep in mind is the tension of similarity and diversity. We tend to gravitate toward relationships with people who are just like you, and there's plenty of room for that. But Jesus also made room for relationships with people who were different than him, and he encourages us to do the same. In Mark chapter 3, verses 16 through 19, we get a glimpse into Jesus' closest relationships throughout his ministry with a group known as the 12. It says this, he appointed the 12. To Simon, he gave the name Peter, and to James, the son of Zebedee, and to his brother John, he gave the name Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder, Andrew, Philip, and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. Now, if you read closely, there are a lot of similarities on this list. They're all men, they mostly do blue-collar work, and they're all Jews. And if you stop there, it can look like Jesus only hung out with people who were just like him. But even within this list, if you read a little bit more closely, you begin to see some diversity that only grows as you follow Jesus through his ministry and then follow the church through the rest of the New Testament. Within this list, you have a zealot who ideologically was opposed to Rome, and you have a tax collector who was on Rome's payroll. And as you look throughout the rest of his ministry, you're going to see that he had friends and followers of different genders, as you see in Luke chapter 8, 1 through 3. He encouraged time with little children, and it's all a hint of what will unfold in the church. As you read the rest of the New Testament, you'll see relationships that include gender diversity, men and women, ethnic diversity, Jew and Gentile, generational diversity, old and young, and socioeconomic diversity, wealthy and low income. Scott McKnight says that through Jesus, we're invited not into a fellowship of people who are just like you, but into a fellowship of difference. Relationships at their best that are marked not just by similarity, but by diversity. Jesus had a relational life, and so do you. And as you follow Jesus into the relational life you're made for, there are at least 3 relational tensions that all of us have to learn to hold together. Being alone and together, family of origin and family of God, similarity and diversity. And in our next session, we're going to explore what it looks like to follow Jesus into the relational life you're made for in 3 primary relational circles.